Food, family, food again, travel, more food, money, more food still. The holidays can be a really stressful time, and they have a tendency to creep up on us before we've really fully prepared for them. So that's what we're here to discuss. Welcome to episode 8, or our Getting Ahead of the Holidays episode of the Ask the Expert podcast. I'm your host, Patrick James Lynch, and today's guest is social worker Eric Iglewski. Eric is a social worker from the Mary M. Gooley Hemophilia Center in Rochester, New York. He shares his perspective, which is informed, of course, by his role as a hemophilia treatment center clinician, but also has been shaped by Eric's vast experience with social work outside of the bleeding disorders community from earlier in his career. He'll share a little bit about that too. The holidays, for all of the festivities and cheer that they bring, present many challenges. Financial, nutritional, travel-related, family-related. They're a complicated time. So I hope this conversation with Eric leaves you with just a couple of tips or ways to think about preparing for them. And that's coming up in just a moment. Just before we get to this interview, I just want to take a minute to talk with you about what it is that I'm doing over here with Bloodstream Media and podcasting for the bleeding disorders community. My company, Believe Limited, started Bloodstream Media to create a network of podcasts, a network of free audio resources for people affected by bleeding disorders. The Bloodstream podcast hits on big news, big stories, and interviews with active community members, and uses contributions from the community to spotlight the various segments of our population. I co-host that with my wife, yoga instructor and doula, Natalie. The Powering Through podcast features panel conversations on obstacles, challenges, and what it takes to overcome. It features community members and special guests, and is recorded in front of live community audiences. The Bloodline series is our This American Lifestyle series, featuring deep dives into important community topics. Our first series on life with von Willebrand disease is composed of over 24 interviews with patients, clinicians, and thought leaders, and, if I may, is super cool and unlike anything else that's out there. And, of course, we have this podcast, Ask the Expert, featuring interviews with community experts on treatment, lifestyle, and advocacy issues. I'm really proud of what we've been able to do with these pods and the thousands of community members that we have reached through them. I think we are balancing entertainment, education, and empowerment really well and creating truly engaging, resourceful podcasts. But I need your help. I need your help to make sure that we keep reaching more people, because while awareness of podcasts is at an all-time high, there are still many people who don't exactly know what they are or how to find them. And sometimes I meet community members who have never heard of podcasts, and I just know that they are exactly the type of people who would benefit from listening to Bloodstream Media's pods. So, you're listening. Obviously, you figured out how to engage with podcasts. Nicely done. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Please leave us a review on iTunes if you haven't already. And please help one person you know find their way to listening to this episode. Maybe a community parent that you know who's nervous about the new school year, or maybe a volunteer in your local community who can help share this with more parents in your area. I'm a big proponent of the value of podcasts and a big believer in the power of community. If our community gets behind pushing out podcasts as a form of communicating, educating, and empowering one another, we'll be stronger and better for it. All right, that's the end of my pitch. Thanks for listening. So, Eric, thank you for taking the time to chat with me today for Ask the Expert. I appreciate that.
It's a pleasure, Patrick.
So we're here to get into kind of thinking about the holidays and getting ahead of them a little bit. But before we jump into that, let's just start with you and kind of how you started to get involved with the hemophilia community. How did you first get involved with social work in general?
Well, it goes way, 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 way back. I've been a social worker for over 20 years, and even back in college, I guess I studied psychology like a lot of other undergrads, and realized that wasn't necessarily going to take me where I wanted to go. So I was looking for a degree that would be pragmatic but also help me make a difference. And so studying social work, getting a master's in social work really worked for me. And the beauty of that degree is I could jump from multiple lily pads and professionally. So in my career, I've worked with traumatized kids around abuse issues. I've done research. I've worked with pediatric oncology cases, and then 7 years now. I came over and joined the bleeding disorder community. I've been working at the Gooley Hemophilia Center since.
And what brought that about? How did you first get involved with hemophilia or find out about hemophilia?
Well, I used to work over at the University Hospital across town in Rochester, and in pediatric hematology oncology. So every so often, a kiddo with hemophilia would get admitted on our service, and the wonderful social worker over at the Hemophilia Center would reach out to me and say, "Hey, let's collaborate on this. Let's make sure my kiddo is getting everything he needs." So I would collaborate pretty closely with the Hemophilia Center, and over the years, and then that particular social worker, who's just great, she reached out to me and said, "Hey, there's a position open. Would you consider it?" And I loved my job. I had no intention of leaving, but when I checked it out and really fell in love with the center and fell in love with the kind of work I could do, and really was drawn to the history. Hemophilia is like it's unique, and it's the only medical condition I know of that kind of comes with a history book, Patrick. And I was really drawn to doing this kind of work, and I didn't have any personal connection, but it just I had the right person who invited me in, so I just stepped through the door.
It's nice to hear you say that the history was an appealing part of it, because just this past weekend was at NEHA for their Fall Fest, and we had an HTC clinician panel there that I was moderating. And one of the topics we touched on briefly was how it's often challenging to get clinicians, hematologists, adult hematologists, but clinicians in general into the hemophilia world. It does seem as though once they are here, everyone stays. It's a contagious community, or I don't know, the claws get in, and it's a small town, and it seems like everybody kind of wants to stay a part of it, but there's that initial challenge. And I have, one of my operating theses is that our history is incredible, and where we are right now, the juncture of treatment, and it is also incredible. Like, we should be kind of emphasizing that, I think, when we look to recruit or when fellows come through on rotations or what have you. So it's nice to hear that the history was something that specifically appealed to you.
No, absolutely. And what I didn't know, but I figured out pretty quick, is there's also this just amazing sense of community, and both among people with bleeding disorders, but also among professionals. And I think just the way our paths interweave, and I just feel so personally and professionally fortunate, because by doing the work I'm doing, I've now got good buddies who are social workers in the hemophilia centers in Seattle and Texas and California, all over the place. And I'm that much richer for it. I feel like I do better work because of it.
And just before we jump into holiday talk, can you give us a little bit of a state of the union of your center in particular? I think it's interesting for people around the country to kind of get a little window into what's going on in communities in other parts of the country. So give us a sense of what's happening at your center.
Well, just a little bit of history to our center as well. I work at the Gooley Hemophilia Center. We're to my knowledge, and I'll say it until someone tells me otherwise, I think we're the oldest freestanding HTC in the country. We've been up and running since 1959 because of our namesake, Mary Gooley, who actually, just turned 92 this year. And she helped put us on the map. And what also makes us unique, Patrick, is and we've been this way again since the 50s. We're both we actually started off as a chapter in 1953 that turned into an HTC. So we're actually a treatment center and an NHF chapter all rolled up in one, which is really kind of a unique model in the country. And what we're doing right now is we're doing, I think, great work. Doing lots of we're serving our community pretty great. We have a really strong interdisciplinary team, I think.
So as we move from late fall into the beginning of the winter, there's a whole slew of holidays that just start to kick in. And once they kick in, the travel kicks in and everything holiday related kicks in. And, I do feel like the holiday season is a time where if I'm not kind of preparing for it and thinking about how I want to approach it, once you're in it, you're in it. And it's just a fast moving train. You've got all these people to see and things to do, loose ends at work to tie up. What are things that people with hemophilia and people with bleeding disorders have to consider?
Gosh, I don't know why I'm going to confess this on your podcast, because other people will be hearing this now, but you're talking to a guy who had a slice of cake 5 minutes before bedtime last night. We don't eat right this time of year, do we, Patrick? And the time of
we
year
don't.
where from October, where candy's in every bowl of the house, to Thanksgiving, where we eat till our belt snaps, all the way through through the winter time. And so it's the time where we tend not to take good care of ourselves, and we don't exercise well enough. And I think that intersects with the hemophilia and bleeding disorders community, because as we know, fitness and healthy choices are integral part of taking care of joints and preventing bleeds and keeping yourself out of the clinic and out of the hospital. So
when you have, sorry, continue. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, please, I insist.
When you have, I would imagine particularly pediatric patients, but that could be a misconception, come through clinic this time of year, I imagine these conversations come up, and if they do, are there certain resistances, or do you get a sense that some kids, it goes in one ear and out the other, or have you found ways to break through in this conversation?
Oh gosh, I wish I could say I have. I mean, we do bring it up, probably not as much as we should. As you know, comprehensive clinic visits can be just a hurried rush of professionals and conversations. Sometimes
Sure.
This probably does get lost in the shuffle more than it should. But again, I guess the good news, bad news is it's not a unique dilemma to the bleeding disorders community. I mean, childhood obesity is becoming an epidemic among many in our society, and like none other in the world, I think. And making healthy choices is a dilemma for the young and the old. And we have contracted with a dietitian in our clinic to help us kind of break some of these issues down. But there's no quick fix around this, as you know, Patrick. This is an ongoing lifestyle kind of journey for most folks. And one thing I do know is it's not just a conversation between a professional and a kid. This is multi-systemic. The whole family should be involved, because usually it's not just the kid who's eating the candy or eating the fried foods or the fast foods. It's the whole family that tends to embrace that. So it's something you have to sort of you have to deal with the whole system, if that makes sense.
It does, and as you said, unfortunately, it's not something that is specifically challenging to our community. So I guess the good news about that is you can find an accountability buddy who doesn't necessarily belong to the bleeding disorders community and just try to keep each other honest, because that person's probably also trying to fend off the temptation to pick up a Kit Kat or have that piece of cake late at night.
That's for sure. And that coupled with this is not a one and done conversation, as I think I sort of implied. This is something you want to keep addressing and readdressing, and just through education and positive coaching. I think people will eventually come around. But again, gosh, McDonald's and Burger King and KFC, man, they all those commercials are hard to compete with sometimes.
Yes, they are. And the weather gets colder, and you want to get cozier, and it's a lot to press up against. But unfortunately, that's also...
If I could add to
Please.
that, though, because you mentioned the weather's getting colder, and I don't... forgive me, Patrick, are you out there in California, is that right?
Yeah, I'm speaking a little more broadly. Southern California, we don't get much variance in our weather, but I know broadly, from what I understand, the weather's beginning to change.
Well, you're talking to a guy up here in Rochester, New York, where, I think we were just talking with our team the other day. I think we're all vitamin D deficient up here. It's just we deal with a lot of gray gloom and doom. We average 100 inches of snow. We're not the only ones. Winter is rough for a lot of folks, and that's the other issue you have with eating right around this time of year is sometimes eating a cookie or a slice of pie makes you feel good when you're feeling blue, and sometimes this time of year can bring the blues. So.
Well, that's a perfect segue, because that is another part of preparing for the holidays that I think is important to anticipate, whether you have some type of seasonal depression, or there are family members that cause you degrees of stress that are uncomfortable and unfamiliar except for this time of year. If you've lost loved ones and all the holiday spirit and joy doesn't quite translate to you the way the commercials would like to position it to connect. There's a lot. So how, and perhaps this is even the more important conversation, how do you help your patients prepare for that aspect of this time of the year?
Yeah. Well, again, no quick fix to that either, Patrick. This is, it's actually a really serious issue because, I called it the blues, but in many cases it can be downright, clinically depressing, and you bring up a lot of other stressors that come. It's not just the clouds; it's the sometimes family conflicts around the Thanksgiving table, or dealing with the in-laws who might stress you out, or the fiscal stress of the commercialism that comes with the holidays.
Absolutely.
And all that you have to spend, and that stuff brings a lot of stress. And as that's kind of, I think, where we come in. I mean, I think social workers in the medical model and the HTC model is no different. We're sometimes misunderstood. The folks you call for insurance, but truth is we're mental health professionals too, and holiday stress and depression and anxiety, that's where we come in, and where with our hopefully our positive therapeutic relationship, and our you can bend our ear anytime. I like to think I'm there for my clients and our patients and family members to help them cope with some of the stresses, and sometimes just having someone you can lean on is all you need. And whether that's what I call us social workers, we're artificial support, but maybe you've got a friend or a spouse or a confidant, anyone who you can lean on to get you through these holidays.
And the holidays, the anxiety, stress, blues, depression, any of the kind of mental, emotional burdens that might come up around the holidays, some of them may be particular to the holidays, and then some of those feelings may just be feelings that you as an individual wrestle with on a acute or chronic basis, and around the holidays, because there's just more activity, they just kind of get underscored. So thinking about that second group of people, those who just kind of generally, and we're learning all the time, I feel like that the mental and emotional needs of our community specifically are maybe not always being accounted for to the degree that they must. So thinking broadly about mental, emotional struggles and challenges, are there any tips that you would have for someone who just kind of generally is battling with something? Or is there a story that from a patient that you've worked with within the community or somewhere else where there was a light bulb or an aha moment and maybe worth sharing?
Well, I think on a general note, I think again, a lot of things that people can do is again, find someone to talk to. I mean, I think depression is sort of a burden of isolation. And when you're going through it alone, I think it makes that burden that much more exponentially heavier and harder to overcome. So talking out your feelings, and it's certainly important to connect with a professional to help you find safe coping strategies. In some cases, antidepressants can get you through. I kind of talked to some of my clients, because there's so much stigma, Patrick, around mental health and even depression, and people see it as sort of a sign of weakness, when in fact it's not. It's a medical condition, and it needs to be taken quite seriously. Otherwise, as you open up any paper and you hear about the tragic burdens of suicide. This is heavy stuff and needs to be dealt with really, really very seriously. So finding a professional to talk to, connecting with your loved ones. Don't isolate yourself. Back full circle to what we talked about healthy choices. I mean, they find that eating right and taking care of your body can make you feel better emotionally. So, and exercise, I've read and been told time and again is as good as any antidepressant, and can really unleash your natural endorphins to make you feel better, and also get you out of the house. So there's a lot of just more common sense kind of ways you can cope with the heaviness of just generalized depression, let alone the holidays.
And you mentioned connecting with loved ones. It's also, and this is something I have to remind myself, because I'm a bit of a people pleaser. I don't like letting people down. I don't like seeming as though I'm less than my best self. There is a difference between connecting with a loved one and being in the mix at a party or an event and feeling the need to keep up a face for everybody. And that kind of pressure can be intense. So I think it's important for us as individuals to be really clear about, is this what's really best for me right now? Maybe I'm not up for this at the moment. Maybe I need to make another choice. And there's a difference between that and isolating yourself. You have to kind of, like you keep referring to, none of this is simple. It's really navigating the gray with as many tools as you can, and staying in touch with yourself and being honest. And I even notice for myself, and I think I'm a pretty mindful, intentional person, how easily I can just lose a sense of my center. In a flash, you can walk into a room, and the cousin you haven't seen in a long time is there, and that's exciting. But before you know it, man, this feels like a lot for me right now. Do I really want to make sure? Do I want to be here for another 2-3 hours, or maybe I should tell Mom I'm gonna head back to the house, and I just need to take a little time.
You hit the bullseye, man. It's about setting limits and taking good care of yourself and not self-sacrificing. Around the holidays, I think a lot of the stress, at least I've what people have told me and what I've witnessed in my own family is comes from this need to be everything to everyone, and to host and to host and host and host, and to feel like you have to participate in every party, which unfortunately parties sometimes bring alcohol, and alcohol is the last thing you want to bring into the equation with depression, because it is depressive unto itself. So it's just a matter of finding balance, and if you're dealing with the heaviness of the holidays, finding someone you can connect with. And if I could, I don't want to generalize. It's still too easy to fall into stereotypes, because but I will say, because hemophilia, as we know, affects guys, and guys oftentimes, because of the way we're socialized, you might even say it. Sometimes some people might even think it's how we're wired. We don't always connect very well with each other. We don't always deal with these kind of issues very well. So I particularly challenge my guys to get over some of these stereotypes and expectations, and challenge them to kind of buck the generalities and connect with each other, and connect with people and talk about what's real, and don't just walk it off, because this stuff can be real heavy.
Eric, one thing we haven't touched on yet is how the holidays often come with travel. And, some of us do a decent amount of traveling and have routines. I have routines with my factor and the shipments and the packing and my letter. And, I have all that stuff in order. But for those who are not traveling as much and maybe haven't built those routines, what should they be thinking about? What things do you want to make sure they're aware of before they wind up at the airport and maybe don't have everything they need?
I think first and foremost, keep your home HTC in the loop. Let them know you're going to go traveling. Like you alluded to, they'll be more than happy to write up a travel letter, and that travel letter is really, really a great tool, Patrick. It talks about your bleeding disorder, it talks about your dosing, talks about your treatment protocol. That comes in really handy, because for our patients it helps get through security with needles. Sometimes TSA doesn't necessarily like us bringing our vials and needles on the plane, so that gets you through that. But also, if you're in a situation where you can't speak for yourself, or if you go into an unfamiliar emergency room situation, that letter can really be a passport to making your medical experience go that much smoother. So in addition to a travel letter, your HTC can also help you figure out maybe the closest available HTC to wherever you're going to. I know my patients here always reach out to me, and either your social worker or nurse can reach out and find out what the closest hemophilia center is, because that's obviously really important too. You don't want to go to someone who doesn't know your condition very well. You mentioned bringing factor. Make sure you have enough not only for your prophylaxis, but also for a couple vials or a couple doses in case of emergency. And I know some folks, believe it or not, bring factor, but they sometimes forget to bring their supplies. You got to make sure you bring all the ancillary stuff as well.
Well, you're talking to an individual who has been guilty of that before, so the reminder is appreciated. It's rather embarrassing to, actually, I'll tell this story real quick. A few years ago, I was doing a TV interview for a PBS station about Stop the Bleeding. And, I go in, I'm talking all about advocacy and the importance of getting young people to lean in and all this stuff, feeling really smart about myself. And it went well. He liked it. He's like, anytime you want to come back. I was like, okie dokie. And I get in my car afterwards, and I was driving from New York City up to Boston to my friend's wedding for the weekend. And I left everything at home. And I thought, wow, there's something remarkably humbling about just having left the television studio talking about hemophilia and advocacy and self-care, and then driving to Boston for a week with none of my stuff. So it was just a good little reset button to, not take for granted. In some ways, we want to not take any of this for granted. It should be in the back of our minds. It shouldn't have to be a dominant consideration, prophy and doing all this stuff in a regimented way. However, The problem becomes you still have to make sure you're doing all the things that need to get done to take care of yourself. And if you get too lax about it, slip-ups like that, just mindless slip-ups are unfortunately possible, as I learned that day.
And you're as human as anybody, Patrick. You're not the only one that's happened to, man.
I appreciate that.
Can I ask you a question? Because I usually recommend this to patients, but tell me what you think on this. I mean, we tend to recommend that folks bring their factor and supplies on the plane in a carry-on because I don't know about you, but I've had my luggage lost too many times. And what do you tend to do? Do you tend to bring it with you, or do you tend to pack it and stow it?
Yeah. I've been very
fortunate.
I'm
turning the tables asking you.
No, it's a good. I mean, hey, why not? It's a conversation. So I really try to protect keeping it on the plane. In fact, I'm currently on an extended 3-week trip, and I just I rearrange the bags accordingly. I've been very fortunate, but I also travel internationally and to places where it's going to be remote, and in part we're there because we're profiling hemophilia care in the developing world and how it's not up to the standard that we need it to be. So that's certainly not a place I want to be going to. And your bag's lost, but now you're in Indonesia. Good luck. So I really, really, really try. There were times where I would be willing to check it. I think I was just a little bit more trusting of the system, and I've been very fortunate. I actually haven't had my bags lost that many times, but something inside me, maybe because I've had a good streak for most of my life, something inside me a few years ago was like, you just have to protect yourself. There's literally nothing more important. All of your clothes, all of your money, everything else you own can go away, and you will be fine in this place. If you don't have that factor, it's a ticking clock until you're out, man. So yeah, I'm with you.
That's always been our philosophy, but and I just know, again, we're up here in the snow belt where bad weather can throw off your flight. You can miss a connection.
Exactly. We're coming to the end of our time. I think we covered a great deal of ground, and the big takeaway for me in this conversation, obviously in 20 minutes we're not going to solve how you prepare for the holidays, but it's important to be intentional, mindful, and prioritizing your self-care. That's kind of a big takeaway for me, whether it's, setting limits on, the time you want to spend at something, anticipating your travel and really thinking through how are you going to pack the medicine so that when you get to the airport, you don't have some stressful TSA encounter. And by the way, everyone else at that airport is traveling, and it's holidays, and the financial, there's just stress everywhere. So the self-care needs to be prioritized. And I think we made that point. But something that you said that just leads me to ask this one final question. People often think, the social worker, they're there to help with insurance. And while that's true, that's a component of what the social worker at HTC is there to do. Can you just give us a little overview with, in the minute or so we have left of, well, better than an overview. Let's do it this way. Can you give us a sense of some of the aspects of your role in the comprehensive care team that often go overlooked by a patient, or, they don't realize until 5 years in that, you can help me find scholarships, or whatever the case may be? Are there any common misconceptions or misunderstandings about your position that, would be useful for the community to hear about?
I think both our clients and our colleagues alike, I think, perceive us as mostly the many times the person who has to deal with the insurance stuff, which we're good at because the social workers are innately seasoned advocates, so we know how to put up a fight for our clients. But we're also, I think, what's forgotten in that is we're clinicians. Social workers in all the HTCs, they're licensed, masters in social work, and they're adept at mental health counseling. So we're here not just. I think when people come to the HTC, the medical model can be so myopic, Patrick. We just kind of look at the diagnosis, we treat it, and take your copay, and you go. It's so much more than that. At our HTC, and I think all the HTCs, it's about treating the person, and the social workers are part of that, and that we're there to make sure your humanity is not lost in the process. So we're here to help you cope with the mental and emotional struggles, the existential struggles that come with a serious illness or medical condition, as well as all the stressors that can come with it. And I guess people just we're here to support you every step of the way.
Well, Eric, thank you again for setting aside the time and for being honest about your own cake consumption. And I'll be honest, my diet this time of year is not great either. So it's not as though we're preaching from on high. We're in this too. And together we will get through the holiday season with the proper amount of joy, self-care, and balance. How about that? Let's make that the goal.
And we're all in this together, man.
We certainly are. Well, thanks for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It means a lot.
Thank you again, Eric, for taking the time to join the Ask the Expert podcast. I think we covered some important topics, and I hope you all feel just a little bit more prepared to move into the 2017 holiday season. I know it's cliche to say, but wow, where did 2017 go? Time really does fly. I must be getting older or something. And that is all for episode 8 of the Ask the Expert podcast series. We'll be back next month with another expert interview. BloodstreamMedia.com is your one-stop shop for all of Bloodstream Media's educational podcasts for the bleeding disorders community. Once on BloodstreamMedia.com, don't forget to follow the links and subscribe to the Ask the Expert podcast, the Bloodstream podcast, the Powering Through podcast, and the Bloodline podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Have an idea for a future episode of Ask the Expert? Have a question that you would like to hear an expert answer? Email us at mailbag@bloodstreammedia.com. You'll also find Bloodstream Media on facebook.com/bloodstreammedia and on Twitter @bloodstreaminfo. This episode of Ask the Expert was written by Patrick James Lynch, produced by Patrick James Lynch, Rob Bradford, Andrew Gall, Josh Bragg, Ava Friedman, Colby Crow, Ryan Gielen, and is edited by Mr. Andrew Gall. Special thanks to our guest, Eric Iglewski. I'm your host, Patrick James Lynch, and until next time, take self-care of yourself. And perhaps let me be the first person to wish you a very happy and healthy holiday season.